Welcome to the first event of 2021 for our Informs Chicago chapter. Today's topic is data analyst in the new normal. And we are super excited to present Kevin Hartman, Global Director of Analyst and at Google. And I'll tell you more about him, but we are so thankful to Kevin to have agreed to spare time to give this talk and benefit the community. A little more about Kevin. As I said, um, he is a devout practitioner of data, and he has published a book, Digital Marketing Analytics in Theory and in Practice. He has received multiple awards, like six-time winner of Advertising Research Foundation's Ogilvy Award, five Canes Lions, five Effies, and over 50 tempos. Wow. He's responsible for leading the design, implementation, and evaluation of programs to recruit, onboard, and develop 3,000 plus analysts across Google's global network. In addition to his role at Google, he teaches graduate level courses in analytics at University of Notre Dame, University of Chicago, and University of Illinois. So you can imagine why he's so apt to talk about this topic, which talks about the precarious role of a data analyst in the new normal. Next, I want to introduce the organizing team at the Chicago chapter and our liaison at the Informs National. So, folks, just say hi. Madhuri, myself, I'm the current president of Informs Chicago chapter. Zitang, he is the current vice president. Um, he just had his first baby this Monday, so he's not in the call here with us, I guess. Ehsan and Chris, they organized and they are the person in charge for organizing the event. Vinod, he's a board member and past president of Chicago chapter. Maria is our treasurer and board member. Sina, Valerie, and Colin are our latest additions as volunteer action committee of Chicago chapter team. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you're interested in joining and participating the team. From National India, um, India Williams is our liaison who has helped with marketing, communications, and setting up the logistics for this Zoom meeting. What would the agenda look like today? We have three parts of today's webinar. As you saw, I have already welcomed you all in introductions. There will be a presentation part A, then which will be followed by a 5-minute session break / moderated Q&A. Part B, then part C. I do want to get a couple of logistic items out. This session is recorded. So by attending this, you have given your consent of being there in the session that is recorded. And secondly, could you, I request all the participants to keep their mics on mute while the speaker is giving their talk. Feel free to send messages or post messages in our chat room to all the panelists. We will be collecting all questions and will be asking those questions to Kevin in the moderated Q&A section. With that, anybody has any questions, please feel free to post in the chat and I would hand it over to you, Kevin. Give
Great.
a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Applause.
That's all right. We're making do with everything virtual. Thank you first. Thank you so much for having me here. This is clearly a topic that I have a great deal of passion for, and I think it's we are at a particularly interesting, as well as I think very challenging time to be an analyst. To be an analyst these days. So I'm looking forward very much to exploring all that with you all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get the presentation up. And away we go. So as we said, we titled the data analysis in the new normal. We are definitely experiencing a new normal now, and it's one that has given great opportunity to analysts for sure, but also created a great deal of uncertainty and doubt and challenge, and all of those things, as I said, make for a very exciting time. It also leaves the analyst in a somewhat precarious position. What we'll talk about are really three different sections, as was mentioned in the intro. We're gonna talk a little bit about just the general role of the analyst, and how that role has evolved over time to where we are today. We'll then get into the particularly large and looming challenge around analysis and the analysts in the marketplace today, which, to foreshadow a bit, has a great deal to do with data privacy, which we can all, both on the side of the analysts, those of us here, as well as on our consumer side, have a great appreciation for both sides of that coin. And it has tremendous impact that I want to spend some time delving into, just so that we understand the full implication of those privacy concerns today. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about the path forward, what the role of the analyst looks like, what analysis looks like going forward, and how organizations can sort of, in effect, skate to where the puck will be, right? To see this movement, see this evolution, and get there. We'll cap off, I think, with a really important section of our talk, which will be around how an organization and the people in that organization can create an environment that is at once welcoming and also optimizes the role that the analyst plays, the very important critical role that analyst plays, and that the responsibility for creating that environment comes from not only the analysts themselves, but also the leaders inside of that organization who are non-analysts, and certainly the executives that are leading that company. So we will talk about all of that today, and I hope you find this as interesting and as exciting as I do. I wanted to start with just a little bit of context here. And this is, for those that don't know, this is Michael Fosnot, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of the City of Chicago. He is my former mentor. Michael hired me years and years and years ago at a firm called Draft FCB, which was an advertising agency that has since now reverted to FCB, Foot Cone and Belding, their original name. Michael was a undisputed visionary when it came to the use of data in the marketing side of organizations. And in that role, as when he was president of Draft FCB and leading the analytics side that he hired me into, he had a very clear and somewhat futuristic vision of the role of analysis. And there's so much to unpack here in this quote from Michael, that over the next few years, geeks in marketing will become one of the most disruptive forces in a discipline that was traditionally driven by big creative personalities. What Michael is talking about here is, in terms of the traditional big creative personality drive, is really on the marketing side no different from what you see in Mad Men, right? It was the 3 martini lunch. It was the biggest personality in the room saying, here is what this creative idea should be, right? And kind of providing it to everybody else. Marketing, the changes that it has gone through are very close to the things that Michael is talking about here. It might have taken a little bit longer, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But no area of any organization has been impacted more than the changes that we are seeing than the marketing organization. And no analyst has been impacted more than the marketing analyst in our environment today. And so Michael saw both the challenge and the opportunity some time ago, 2006. And we've been working really towards that for a while. That role of the analyst is a tremendously critically important one today. Data has become, without a doubt, the most important asset that an organization can have. And the analyst, then, the owner of that data, the one that makes sense of that data, has a very, very important position. For me, being successful there means a mindset. It also means some skill. And I wanted to spend just a little bit of time kind of framing up for us here at the beginning what it means to be a successful analyst. This is the idea of blending art and science. And in my mind, there isn't a purer role or sense than being an analyst in this digital age who can use the tools and technology on the scientific side to collect that data, analyze that data, but still needs to tell stories from that data, right? That's the artistic side that they bring to that equation. And the wonderful conundrum for any analyst is that you can't be successful owning only one of these roles, right? You must blend them both. You must be able to tell elegant stories and have those stories backed by the data and the insights and the hard truths that you've collected, right? Doing that, and what I tell students, this is one of, in any of the courses I teach, this is one of the first slides that I show them, is that being a successful analyst means that you are somewhere between these two great thinkers, right? You don't have to be Picasso, you don't have to be Einstein for sure, but you should think of yourself as sort of a blend in between the two of them, ideally. That's what to be a successful analyst, those are the things that you need to do. You need to be able to go deep into the numbers on the left side of your brain and then translate those over to those stories through the right. And blending both sides of your mind together allows you to achieve that idea of art science and makes you a successful analyst. But it is clearly not enough. There is an attitude too that must come along with that, with embracing the idea of art science. That attitude is really marked by three different characteristics. One very important one is curiosity. The analyst, the successful analyst, is infinitely curious, right? They are always seeking new questions. They're always tackling and finding answers that then open up even more questions to them. And that is success for the analyst. At no time are we in this endeavor to sort of cross the end zone or cross the finish line and say we're done, right? Anytime that an analysis comes to a completion, it should be greeted by several more open doors and questions that need to be addressed. And that is why the idea of being curious is so important to the successful analyst. That's one of those characteristics that the successful analyst has. Another is the idea of optimism and being optimistic. The work that the analyst does, particularly at this time, is tremendously challenging. It is a difficult endeavor to collect all the data, the right sort of data that we have access to, and then to use that data in an effective way. You wind up running into more brick walls than finding open doors, for sure. And the resilience, the optimism that you are clear, you are believing that there is a way, is a second tremendously important characteristic to any analyst. The third important characteristic is the idea of being bold and taking pride in the work that the analyst does. What this does, in my experience, is it brings a tremendous attention to detail. If you are proud of the work that you are going to do, you are going to pay attention to every single detail. And you're going to want it to be right. And this is tremendously important for any analyst, that attention to detail, that getting it right in the very basic and the most minute side of the effort. Without those characteristics, analysts will flail, analysts will give up to the frustration. Right? Analysts will not produce good work. Those characteristics are tremendously important. But again, even the characteristics, even embracing this mentality is not enough. This is where the hard skills come in. And any analysts, particularly those operating today, are able to play three distinct roles. They are able to play the role of the data strategist. They know how the data, the information that they're collecting translates to the goals and objectives of the business. They know what good looks like. They know what is important and what is not. And they're able to put the data that they're collecting in the context that people outside of the analyst role will understand. That's important. They also have the ability to, what we call the techie role, that ability to use tools to collect data, to analyze that data in an effective and efficient manner. Much of our emphasis as an analyst is placed here just because tools have evolved and grown so much. That is the hard skill that separates the analyst from others in the organization. But there are still these other roles that are just as important. And that third is the idea of being the data designer. It's the ability to tell stories from the data that we find, the insights that we have, and communicate those in ways that people understand. This means, more specifically, the data strategist understands business concepts. They understand the environment in which they operate, not the data and the numbers environment, the broader business perspective, and have a good understanding of that. The techie skill is clear. These are the hard skills. These are the software, the hardware skills that we need to be successful effectively. And the data designer not only has good technical skills in the data visualization perspective, but also great communication skills and knows how to tell a story and knows how to use data. The three of these roles together are what marks an analyst today. Any organization today is seeking that I teach in emphasize all three of these areas and the growth around each of the roles for our graduates. And it's because there used to be a time where maybe being more specific could provide value for an organization, or they organized around very specific roles. Those days are gone. And those days have changed dramatically as we have gone through a number of different paradigm shifts in our business environment. Each of those paradigm shifts have created new challenges for the analysts as well, but have created an abundance of opportunities. In the 90s, our focus was moving into digital, and any company that was operating on those days needed a .com, even if they didn't quite understand exactly what it was going to be. The tremendous amount of digital data that was being created and then collected by the analysts was so valuable that this was an evolution done. We moved in the 2000s into the mobile era and an explosion of data creation to the point that we have almost too much data. But luckily, as we've moved into this final, where we sit today in this final paradigm shift, the idea of using systems and machine learning and other technologies to make sense of all that data. And the counterweight has been the privacy concerns that have evolved. Those paradigm shifts developed at a speed that perhaps executives inside businesses, non-analyst executives, had difficulty reconciling. And part of that is because the understanding of the customer of any business was what executives hung their hat on. This is how they became who they were. They understood who those shoppers were. And it didn't matter what part of the organization they were in. They understood that shopper, what was important to them, what wasn't, what they were thinking when they were walking through the aisle, what they were looking for, what they needed and what they didn't need. And much of that understanding came from a pretty simple but very powerful framework that was promoted by Procter and Gamble in 2005. So right in the middle sort of that second paradigm shift as we were moving in toward mobile. What P&G talked about was this idea that there was a first moment of truth and a second moment of truth that were critical for brands to win. That they followed some sort of stimulus. What P&G promoted was a three-step model of marketing, the way that companies and brands connected to people and consumers. Some stimulus happened that triggered the want, the need for a product. Either that consumer saw an advertisement that they really liked and thought, I want to go get that, or they ran out of a product and realized they needed a replacement. From there, in P&G's idea, the brand, the company then faced two important moments of truth. The first was the idea of the consumer comes to the aisle, standing at shelf, and needs to choose between your product or your competitor's product. That was the first moment of truth. For a brand to be successful, P&G said, they needed to win that first moment of truth. The second moment of truth was the idea that when the consumer got that product home and experienced it, they got to judge for themselves whether or not that product lived up to the expectations that had been set for that product. If it did, in P&G's idea, then the company had most likely acquired a consumer for life. They had satisfied someone's needs, and next time they were sure to be chosen as the product in that category. 2005, as we can imagine, was a different year. At that time, just to put some context around where we were, one of the most effective ways and efficient ways to reach a differentiated consumer segment was through print advertising, specifically newsprint advertising. You knew someone reading the New York Times was different from someone reading the Post, right? You knew that if they were reading the Miami Herald, they were in a different environment altogether from the LA Gazette. And so you could use placement in those newspaper vehicles as a way to reach not only a specific location in the country, but also a specific demographic and sometimes even a psychographic that you were trying to reach. And you could see over time the growth in newspaper ad revenue from here, several decades before, up to that 2005 date, that time that P&G was talking about its three-step model of marketing. 2005 was somewhat different. Here's from the photo file. This is 2005. This is St. Peter's Square in Rome. This is the installation of Pope Benedict in 2005. Some 8 years later, this is St. Peter's Square, Rome, the installation of Pope Francis. You can see a dramatic change. And what happened was that move to mobile really exploded and created a completely different interchange between brands and consumers. Frankly, changed every aspect of our lives at that time. You want to guess what happened to newsprint revenues, ad revenue from that time on? 2005 to 2012, it fell off the table. And that's the reason why Google and others kind of developed this idea of the zero moment of truth in a marketing chain. So it still meant that companies, brands still needed to win at shelf. They still needed to have a consumer choose them when they were there at the point of sale. That first moment of truth is still very important. And the product needs to live up to expectations. That second moment of truth was critically important as well. But what was introduced was this idea of the zero moment of truth. This is the time that consumers are checking information, reading reviews, finding out what their friends think, doing price comparisons, actually sometimes collecting so much information that when they show up to shelf, they have more insight and data than the sales associates do in those stores. That ZIMA period, that zero moment of truth, is a tremendously messy, disorganized space. It is consumers bouncing around to a tremendous number of sources. The number of sources they use each year grows, no matter what category they're looking at. This is also for us in the analytics space, our lifeblood. This is where we learn about consumers. This is where we can test ideas. This is when we can try to influence those consumers by placing ads, by using digital intervention, by tracking them and learning what they do like and what they don't like. Sometimes it gets confusing. Then you has staked their career on the understanding of who this consumer is, that person who is the customer of their business and of their brand. And then people like me walk in and say, yes, 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 this is absolutely your consumer, but this is your consumer as well. This is 160 or so digital touch points that we might see from someone from the time that they start to signal that they are in market for a product before they finally make a decision to make a purchase, right? And all of that data is tremendously valuable. This is ZIMA. This is a type of information that is flying around and the type of data that we as analysts can use to our company's benefit. And sometimes I feel that with that vast amount of information, we lose some sense for just how much it is. So to help us there and to bring a little context, I put together this infographic. And I basically collected information from a number of sources, sized all the boxes appropriately, right? So every single day, these are all with billions, right? Every single day, there are 6.2 billion YouTube videos viewed and 5.8 billion Facebook likes, 5.6 billion Google searches. Each one of those are providing tremendous insight into who a consumer is, what they like, what's important to them, and equally as important, what's not important to them. Now, those numbers are probably deflated a little bit as well, as some of them have come from they've all come from public sources. But these are numbers that places like Google, places like Facebook keep very close to their chest. And most likely, even the numbers here, despite how vast and enormous they are, might not quite encapture all the kind of activity that goes on. But with an infographic like this, we can start to layer in some additional data that gives us context for just how much information that is, right? And here in the upper right is a brown box which represents the number of cups of coffee made each day on Earth. You can literally get coffee anywhere on Earth, right? Everything else is from the 60% or so of our population on Earth that is digitally enabled. The two boxes down there at the bottom, the red box and the blue box, those are the number of votes cast in the UK EU referendum, the Brexit vote. And then in the blue, those are the 150 million votes cast in the last 2020 presidential election. Those things happening for a presidential election once every 4 years, for the UK EU referendum, I think many of them hope once in a lifetime, right? Everything else happening every single day. So this vast amount of information that is collected deliberately and willfully by consumers is tremendous. And again, each of them providing tremendous insight into who those consumers are. But yet those aren't even the sources of probably the greatest amount of data that is being generated today. For that, here's the interactive portion of our show today. You can pull up your phone and you could go to either of these links, maps.google.com/location history or google.com/ads/preferences. And what you will see when you go there, depending on your login and your location sharing, it could look something like this. This is from mine. This is a typical day for me on a Saturday. That location history is the data that is created by your device, in this case, my phone, that is telling Google and others where I am at all times. And even more than that, this was, as I said, a typical Saturday. I got up and in red, I went for a run. I went down to, there's a place near Sheffield, neighbors area that was a farmer's market. And there were some flowers there. I didn't have any money on me. I just asked if they could hold it aside. I ran back home. I got into a car, and then in dark blue, I drove back to the farmer stand and purchased the flowers, and then drove back, went over to Roscoe Square to do some shopping. Later that day, I took a walk in light blue to Bear Burger. And then even later that day, I rode my bike to, without a doubt, the greatest frozen yogurt stand in America, Scooters up on Belmont. If you've had the pleasure of being there, you know what I'm talking about. I didn't tell Google that I was in my car. I didn't tell them that I was going for a run or that I was on a bike. Google understands this from the way that I am interacting with my phone and from the way the phone is moving. And all that data is being generated passively by these devices, all the devices that we have all the time. The other link that I showed you is Google's opportunity or Google's attempt to sort of make sense of that data, right? And identifying different interests that you, all of us have, based on the videos we've watched, based on other information that they can collect about us, so that they can create more of a customized experience for us as a consumer. It also, on the other side, it allows them to identify us as having specific interests that might pertain or might be more important to certain brands, right? If there's a brand that wants to reach baseball fans, then they should look me up. And they would know if they come to Google and say, I would like to focus an advertisement towards baseball fans, who winds up in that specific cohort. Part of all this tremendous data creation and somewhat of a chicken and egg question has led to a revolution in the business side, the technology side of the analyst world. And I think that is probably the best way to demonstrate what has happened on the technology side is through the Brinker's MarTech landscape. This is doubtless many of you have seen this. This is a very famous infographic that Scott Brinker put together back in the early days when marketing technology was still somewhat nascent and no one really knew what it was. What Scott did is he sat down and he looked at all the companies that he could find that were in that space and began to categorize them in some way. Now, Scott was not able to find every single company. And if you looked at his landscape today, you would find a number of companies that existed at this time that didn't make his infographic because it was such a nascent space. But for the first time, really, Scott kind of laid out how many companies are operating here. And it was such a successful infographic that after he found the 150 on that first year, he went back the next year and decided to do it again, and the next year after that. And while he certainly got better at collecting those companies, the growth that he saw is undeniable. Those landscapes went from 150 companies in 2011 to 350 the next year, jumped to 1,000 by year 3, doubled to 2,000 in 2015, and grew and grew and grew until in 19, more than 7,000 companies operating in this space. And the one that Scott did most recently, and we should expect here soon a 2021 map, included over 8,000 companies. And the really remarkable thing about that is that the total number grew by about 14% from the previous year. But if you look at the number of companies that ceased to exist, those that went out of business in 2020, then you're really talking about 20% growth from the previous year as new companies came in to replace those companies. That growth in technology has both fed the data creation that we are seeing, it also has allowed companies to make sense of that data collection. And probably more than anything, that growth has meant great things for analysts. These are 8,000 companies now operating in this space today, who would desperately love the use of the help that they could get from good analyst talent. So it means that there are a number of very great employment opportunities for anyone working in this space. But it also, frankly, for the executive that we are talking about, who again has, in more of a traditional sense, has made it where they are by understanding the consumer of their category. This is very confusing. I mean, not only are you now dealing with a new way of doing business, you're dealing with new technologies that are supposed to either replace or improve the way that you're operating. There are countless companies coming at them every single day at every opportunity trying to sell services. And without a doubt, many of them don't have the tools or the understanding that they need to really make sense of any of those offers. So this is another important role that the analyst plays. Not only to know how to take advantage of the output from these organizations, but how to translate those to the non-analyst and to become that buffer, that guide, if you will, through the technology side of the work that we do. There's a final kind of impact on the role of any executive and certainly any analyst operating today, and that is the idea of FAMGA. And you'll hear this acronym, which stands for Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, and used in a number of ways. I think for the analysts, it means that it's had tremendous impact on the environment in which we work, either from the technologies that they've created, the challenges they've introduced, or the way that they've been able to impact and influence the market around us. Apple has had, with its products, seen tremendous growth, obviously, in the move to mobile, and has identified a certain desirable set of consumers that most brands are looking to connect to. They've done a fantastic job with those products. Microsoft and Amazon have been leaders in cloud computing and changing the way that companies can host and analyze data. Google is a distant third. It's interesting, Google has invested literally billions and billions of dollars in building out its cloud computing capability, and is a very distant third to Amazon at the top, Microsoft somewhat just a little bit behind that in that industry. But the creation of all that cloud computing capability, again, as I said, has allowed us to handle the tremendous amounts of data that's created and to really do something with it. Facebook has introduced a tremendous number of challenges for analysts, both in the way that they have, through some of their experiences, really more than any, opened up this idea that the privacy concerns that consumers are feeling. And we'll talk more about that in the second half of our talk today. I think the other idea that I wanted to express about this troop, the FAMA collection of companies, is the way that they've influenced the market. And doesn't matter what company you are today, you are either connected to these companies through the products that they build, the data that they provide you, or you are just in the sphere of their market weight. That is best illustrated by Amazon, and particularly Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods a few years ago. L2 did a very interesting analysis of that. What they looked at was after Amazon made its purchase of Whole Foods, what happened to the stock price of Amazon, as well as of the companies operating as competitors to Whole Foods. And the interesting thing was within 24 hours of that announcement that Amazon had purchased Whole Foods, Amazon's market cap raised 2%. In fact, the amount of value that was created by that increase, that 2% increase on Amazon's base, actually eclipsed the amount of money that they spent on Whole Foods. So they effectively got Whole Foods for free as their market cap absorbed the outlay that they had placed for Whole Foods. The companies operating in that grocery space, though, had a very different story. Walmart, for instance, a $300 billion company at the time, within 24 hours of Amazon making the purchase, they lost 5% of their market valuation. $15 billion lost in one day because of the move Amazon had made. And that is a move into a direct competitor that you might be able to understand. But what happened the next day is that Amazon had another press conference, and they talked about some other areas that they may be interested in pursuing acquisition. Dental supplies, perhaps prescription drug, maybe sporting goods. And on the announcement that they were looking in these areas, Amazon's stock price again went up a percent. And the companies in those areas saw loss. Someone like CVS, an $80 billion company, Amazon just mentioning that they may make a purchase in prescription drugs, not making a purchase, just mentioning that they may make a purchase, dropped their market cap 5%. $4 billion lost overnight because Amazon made an announcement. I mean, this is the sheer weight and influence of a company like Amazon. The other companies in that space, most of them, many of them, particularly Facebook and Google, rely on digital advertising to keep their doors open. Both Facebook and Google create about 95, maybe more percent of their revenue through their ad sales. So both companies are looking to diversify more. You've seen both of them create hardware. You see other moves, again, Google's move into cloud computing that are meant to diversify that and take some of the weight off of their ad revenue or reliance from their ad revenue. But this is an enormous market. I mean, by 2023, reaching close to $500 billion in ad revenue sale. Those ad revenues, that ad revenue, is again why you can go to Google and search for free. It's why you can watch YouTube videos for free. It's why you can go to Facebook for free. You do that in exchange of seeing ads. Again, you can see the circle for the analyst where the data collected and understanding who you are as a consumer feeds those ad choices, which then the ad revenues that are collected from companies that want to speak to people like you and me on those platforms funds those companies. All of this kind of coalesce around a number of different changes in marketing. And for the analyst who is working on the marketing side of things is seeing more change than any. But this is certainly impacting analysts working in finance, analysts working in really any industry at all. But those changes are quite dramatic. Over those paradigm shifts that we talked about, we've seen companies go from this idea of a one-to-one brand to consumer message, figuring out who that consumer is, and directing investing to direct a specified message to that person, and trying to do that in a way that through a segmentation that brought scale to those efforts. Now everything is much more real time and independent. We build messaging for specific use cases and moments, regardless of who the consumer is, and then use targeting and other capabilities to get the right message in front of someone, because the technology has evolved so much. There was a time when to create a television spot, a 30-second spot that cost millions of dollars, would take months and months of tedious preparation and planning. Now we see companies creating dozens, maybe hundreds of ads in a few hours with just simple tweaks based on the use of different technologies to help them move items around in those ads or change things that they can optimize toward. The world of marketing, particularly that world that the analyst was in, was at one time a much more in the moment kind of war room mentality, where you were tracking and watching everything incrementally and making moves. Now, with the use of rules-based technologies, it's actually taken the human decision maker out of many of those processes and made for a much more efficient, albeit much more technology weighted and influenced approach to marketing. In the marketing world, using a single agency was the way of business not long ago. Now we see companies managing dozens, a whole portfolio of agencies, and many of those technologies that I talked about are included there. Finally, the way that companies are measuring before was just what could be measured, sort of a catch-can approach to measurement, doing the best that we were able to given the data we had. Now, with a tremendous amount of data, we have shifted, and this is as we will start to transition into the second part of our talk. We are placing much more emphasis on the need for consent from consumers, as that impacts the way that we can collect and use data, as well as the things that we can measure in this space. So at that is sort of part A of our talk, just setting up the role of the analysts and where they are positioned today. I'll pause, and I think we'll see if we have any questions to tackle at this point. But foreshadowing where we're going is into more of a privacy conversation, and then finally sort of a view towards the future. So, Hassan, are there
Thank you,
questions?
Kevin.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm still here. So let me quickly jump into some of the questions which we are receiving.
Oops, I just lost you there, Hassan. There you
Yep, I'm still here. Still here. I'm just pulling up the question sheet here. And all right. So thank you very much, Kevin. Really insightful. The way you are putting it through, really, it's great. We're learning a lot. So you touched upon, three elements for a good analyst, and like it has to be a blend of a data strategist, techie, and a data designer. So what do you say? What is maybe the core among these, and what should be a priority of analysts during the journey, right, from a fresh entrant to becoming a seasoned pro? What can be the order of priority for a balance in these, or like from the start they have to keep a 33% balance in all of those, or that's the first one, and then we'll go ones also.
I think let me answer your final question. I think in terms of the balance, it's dependent more on where you are in the organization and the industry that you're working in. There are industries that are far more technical than others, and so you do need to, as an analyst, you'll have to match that. But I would say, regardless of the industry, I have kind of two answers. The most important skill, in my opinion and in my experience, is that of the business strategist. It is being able to to present and understand the data and the numbers that we're working with in the context of greater and bigger business objectives. Because if you can't do that, then you will find yourself just doing analysis for analysis sake. And even worse, you're unable to communicate and answer the questions that your non-analyst stakeholders will have. So the business strategist piece is always the most important. But I think what we can do as analysts are we can continue to build our technical skills as the skills evolve. We can continue to work on our data designer and visualization skills so that you have the hard skills in front of you. Much of that data strategist work comes from being immersed in an industry for a while and just understanding it. There is no real shortcut to that. Sometimes it does have to be hard-earned experience. That's why you have all the gray hairs, right? I think that's the color of experience. So those are the things that you earn along the way.
It comes with sweat and
exactly
burning the midnight oil, right?
That's what I believe. Yes.
Right. So whenever there's a question that with digital marketplace, how would you practically distinguish between ZIMA and the first moment of truth?
It's a great question because it becomes in our world today done in adopting this idea of ZIMA is recognize that being everywhere a consumer is going to be is very expensive. And most companies don't have the resources to make that kind of commitment. So what they've done instead is they've tried to leap the moment of truth by just getting the product into consumers' hands. It's a classic loss leader approach to marketing. But what it does is it presents the consumer with the product, facilitates the purchase, so that you are rushing that consumer into a first moment of truth and trying to make it just so easy for them to purchase that they can't say no. Now the traditional sense of ZIMA would be using the exchanges and interactions that you have with the consumer to influence them. There's plenty of room for that, particularly for more high engagement categories like automobiles, homes, right? With places that people are investing a lot of money and resource into, they will still go through those classic data collection process. But for things that, say, sneakers or clothes, other things that can be produced for much less expense and would be much less of an investment for consumers, that idea of ZIMA in the first moment of truth is beginning to meld together quite a bit as companies realize that is a successful marketing strategy.
So it's fusing it more together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So just letting you know, all the participants, they can put their questions in the chat, and then Kevin would be happy to answer them. We are definitely going through our first Q&A sessions. There are 2 others to follow, but if you have anything so far, please do put in the chat, and then we'll put it to Kevin.
Great. All right, so let's continue on. Yeah. So we'll start to talk about the new normal, right? And the predicament that we find ourselves in now balances this idea of data collection and data importance with the need for consumer consent and the respect for their privacy. The reasons that we in the analytical and measurement fields collect data and indeed measure are many. Some of the more important ones for an organization are that we use this to set the source of truth. This becomes for an organization the view of the world that they can rally around. The place where they can begin to use to solve their challenges, right? That is also the place that allows us to derive insights, to find new opportunities, to test and see if things are working or not, and to really optimize our experiences or the efforts that we are putting into market. And in that way, we want to be able to put these insights to use, right? These are some of the high broad stroke reasons why we measure today. And so consent becomes a very important part of that. Doubtless you have all seen pop-ups asking you to accept cookies, right? But much of this is coming or driven from GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, from the EU. But while it originated in the EU, it's covering really anyone doing business today, because it says that if you do have the opportunity to collect information from an EU resident, then you must use this sort of consent vehicle, which really any company doing business online has the opportunity to collect information on people in the EU. So it's become universal, and doubtless you've seen it and you've noticed it. The reason that those cookies are so important is because they are one of, not the only, but they are one of the most important tools that we use on the analytics side to collect information about consumers and also measure the effectiveness of those strategies that we're employing and the ads we're showing. Here, just in a Google example, this is how those cookies work, right? And have worked since 1994. I mean, this is, for 27 years, the way that we've been collecting information. You come to a website, that website loads, there's an ad that is shown to you. There's a whole process behind that as they went through an exchange to get that ad placed just for you, as depending on what they know about you. That ad, as it loads, will drop a cookie. Someone like me then can use that later on to say, I see the people who saw this ad. If you click on that ad, then there's another cookie dropped, or maybe that cookie is modified so that I know that you not only saw the ad, you engaged with it, which, in a display campaign, maybe 1 out of 1,000 people do. And if they do that, then you actually have a very successful campaign. But when you click on that ad and then go to the ad's website, the landing page that they're taking you to, and you make a purchase, that for me completes the journey. I can say, this person saw an ad, they engaged with it, and they ultimately made a purchase. So in this example, when the advertiser who's selling the remote control trucks wants to know what they earned from their investment in ads, in this case with Google, I can show them. I can tell them, you gave us this much money. It costs this much in ad revenue. You earned this many sales as a result. Incrementally, we can even tell them of this result of this campaign. And that allows us to calculate a return on investment, a return on ad spend, those sorts of measures that are important for that organization. Now, one of the things that isn't talked about much in the industry is that there isn't a complete and perfect view of anyone's journey across the web. These cookies can be somewhat unstable. As they can be blocked with some privacy settings on your browser. They can be deleted and expunged. And so while we know we are dealing with only a partial view of the experiences for consumers through cookies, we can fill those gaps in our understanding with models. This is the difference between what we would call deterministic, which is where we actually see the cookie and we know the behavior happened, and probabilistic. This is where we've modeled based off that data and based off the experience. And like I showed you at the beginning, when you have billions and billions of exchanges with consumers every single day, you start to get a good sense of what that picture looks like. So even though these are modeled, they're modeled on a tremendous amount of information and understanding. Now, things began to change around the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right? This is for the first time, I think, the consumers were exposed to the kind of information that was being collected about them and how companies were using that data. And it led to quite a reaction, not one that could not have been seen for sure, and not one that wasn't inappropriate. But in some cases, it did lead to a little bit of exaggeration. Um, Jeffrey Fowler did a wonderful piece in the Washington Post, and what Jeffrey did was talk about his Google Chrome browser and the number of cookies that it collected, tracking cookies in a week. And it was something like, it was in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands. But there was some sensationalism that went on. At the top there, you see a picture. That's Jeffrey in the suit and brown slacks walking, and behind him are those nefarious-looking people in white and black are representing cookies that follow him around through a Main Street shopping center. And at one point, Jeffrey goes into a clothing store and he sees this jacket that he really likes, and he sees the price tag is $10, and he goes to reach for it, and just before he gets it, one of those cookies reaches up and grabs the $10 and replaces it with a $100 price tag, literally 10xing the price. And I'm here to tell you that cookies are very important, and they do collect information about you, and they allow advertisers to know more about who you are and what you like and what you don't like. And while dynamic pricing is certainly a thing, I don't know of anyone that's using cookie information to 10x the price of a jacket for you. So there was some sort of sensationalism that went into this, but I think captured very well the ethos of consumers and the concern over who has their information and what will they do about it. This has led to the kind of regulatory response that we've seen, the GDPR that I talked about, the California Consumer Protection Act that is still working its way to the ground, that has been in the courts for a while, but will doubtless help protect consumers by making it more transparent on who is collecting data about them, how that data is being used, and to what ends. And importantly, giving consumers control over that data. They can take it, they can use it, they can get rid of it if they want. And all of that is a very important part of any consumer's online experience. ITP, Apple's Intelligent Tracking Prevention, is another response to that that privacy concern. And what ITP does is it blocks the use of those cookies on Apple devices, and now even the scope is widening even more to really block it on anyone using a Safari browser or an Apple device. The elimination of those cookies is something that certainly can be cast in the idea of protecting consumer privacy. One of the interesting kind of inflection points of the rise of ITP was this, and this isn't talked about much, but there was an event that happened where Facebook was collecting data on consumers. It was literally offering them $20 for them to hand over their web logs so that Facebook could conduct some experiments and understand where consumers are going. It turned out that some of those consumers were as young as 13 years old. Apple got wind of this and said, stop, and Facebook pushed back. Facebook said, no, we are within our terms of site and use and consent, and we think it's okay for us to pay people for these activity logs. Apple said, okay, and within a month had released the very capricious form of ITP 2.1, which severely limited the time that a cookie would stay on a desktop and severely limited the type of information that places like Facebook and Google, frankly, were collecting or able to collect. Here's what that does. I talked about how tracking happened before ITP, right? And again, the important part here is that we can connect ad exposure to some sort of behavior so that we can prove the benefit and the importance of the ads that we had achieved and collected. When ITP happens, those cookies are blocked. So that view of who saw the ad and who engaged with that ad, and even who purchased that product as a result, is now lost. Not entirely, but it is lost. And that has tremendous effect on my ability to talk to an advertiser about what they are actually earning from the money they're giving to me. Apple, again, has done this in this idea of privacy. There's been a little war of words as Sundar Pichai, who's the Alphabet CEO and who runs Google, has fired back that privacy can't be a luxury good, right? Which is a very thinly veiled shot at Apple. The problem here is that Apple doesn't rely on ad revenue much. They have a network for sure, but it's nothing like Facebook and Apple do, or Facebook and Google do. So the ones that are really being hit are Facebook and Apple. And how much data are we talking about? Well, originally, Apple and Firefox, Mozilla, were the two that enacted this plan of limiting cookie use. And you're talking about a quarter, roughly, of desktop activity. You're talking about more than half of mobile activity, which means that for those gaps that I showed you before that we have in our data collection, you've just eliminated a quarter more of our desktop traffic, more than half of our mobile traffic. So the gaps that we had before have been blown open as the data that we're collecting we aren't able to collect. More importantly, what that did is it forced Google into an awkward position. And as everyone was expected, about a year ago, Google came out and said, okay, we'll stop collecting cookies on Chrome as well. And so the expectation is that that'll be done by 2022. So we're starting to phase those out and develop some new alternative ways to use information. But once that happens, you are truly talking about the death of the cookie. Because between Safari, Firefox, and Chrome as a browser, no browsers are used outside of those three. Very few browsers are used outside of those three. Now, there are other rules for app usage, and some app information can be collected, although Apple has started to move into some privacy influence there as well. But this basically has pretty far-reaching effects and impact on marketing, certainly on that data that analysts can collect, and certainly the companies that are using that information. It will indicate create a loss in media effectiveness. Places like Google, places like Facebook can no longer explain to advertisers who saw their ads and what they did as a result of them. Then that media is going to look less enticing and less effective. It also has a great effect on the ability of advertisers to target consumers. If I don't know who you are, I can't create a customized experience for you or a customized advertisement for you if I can't identify you. And I'm, again, using very often that cookie as the way to identify who you are. It means, as I talked about, a heavier reliance on probabilistic models. We had gaps in consumer experience before that we would plug with these models to a small extent. Now, with even further loss of data, those models become even more important and more significant to our estimates on the effectiveness of media, who saw media, and the targeting that we employ. And then finally, it has a tremendous impact on companies that we in the industry would term performance marketers. These are companies that are have online conversions, that they have online connections to consumer, they deal in data. Much of the way that they make those connections and the way their systems operate, all that MarTech that I showed you is operates in a rules-based system, something that is auto-generated, and if you stop, and it's reliant on information and data to help make those decisions. If you don't have the data to feed into those systems, then the systems no longer work. I think a clear example is one of a travel site that is trying to determine who you are as a consumer, and that understanding of who you are and your propensity to buy a travel package on their site and the size of that travel package will dictate to them how much they would be willing to spend on a keyword to get their search ad in front of you on Google or Bing or wherever it is you're searching. Without an understanding of who you are, I can no longer optimize those bids. And for a performance-based company like that, that exactness, that preciseness in their marketing is the difference between profitable activity and loss. And so this has really real ramifications on the business models operating in our economy today. Perhaps most importantly, it has tremendous impact on this, on the ad revenue that I talked about. Again, one of the reasons why we at Google and those at Facebook and other places are able to collect so much information or such staggering amounts of ad revenue is because we have data that we're able to collect that will allow brands to put messages in front of very specific audiences, matching the right message to the right person at the right time. That ad revenue that we collect, again, is the reason that you can search Facebook for free, or watch a YouTube video for free, right? Or do a Google search for free, or tweet for free. Like these companies are, their lifeblood is that ad revenue. So it will start to impact that as companies are less able to understand the ROI, the ROAS that they earn, the return on ad spend that they earn from those investments. What this should also say to you is that in no way would any of this, the loss of cookies, the deletion of cookies, will that reduce the number of ads that you will see. In fact, it will probably have the opposite effect, because until these companies are able to replace their business model and their revenue generation with some other source of revenue, they're going to continue to earn ads, earn through ads. And if today much of that advertising earns a premium because it can be specifically targeted to specific groups, if you take away the ability to target them and remove that premium, the only way that companies can make up for that loss in incremental ad revenue is by showing more ads. So what you'll wind up facing is an environment, well, yeah, you can still watch YouTube ads for free, or you can watch YouTube for free, but instead of seeing the one ad that you used to, now maybe it's three. And instead of going to Google search and just seeing 3 traditional search ads, now maybe it's 5, as those ad loads, as they're called, increase, and in an attempt to just make up for that lost revenue. this is also putting companies that want that data and are relying on that data in a different position. And it's something that companies have not done well. It's the idea of explaining to you as a consumer why they need that information, right? I mean, I continue to ignore this request that I get from Twitter to turn on personal ads for no real reason. I understand exactly what they're trying to do. I know why they'd use the data. I'm not afraid of Twitter having that information on me, but I just want to see, kind of goad them into making some other, making some other offer to me. All they continue to come back with is this idea that I may see more ads. um, unless companies who want this data can present consumers with a true value exchange for that data, they're not going to be able to achieve the kind of insight, the kind of information that they need to effectively run the marketing programs or operate as a company in the way that they want to. That will have tremendous impact, certainly for any company operating, and certainly for any analyst in a number of ways. One, it limits the amount of data that you're able to collect. And so the way that we can respond to that are by building models that are more accurate based on less data, which is a tremendous challenge for any analyst. It also means that in the frame that we talked about at the beginning, that business strategist role becomes that much more important, as now many of the decisions that you need to present will be based on instinct and intuition more than on solid data, right? Less data collected, less data analyzed means more reliance on instinct and intuition. And so this is why, as I talked about in the last section, that important role, that the most important role that we as analysts can build is around that data strategy role. And that's particularly preparing us, future-proofing us, if you will, for what comes next. And I think that is a good segue. I think we're doing pretty well on time. But that's a good segue into part C of our conversation today. So, Hassan, I'm not sure if there are questions that we have at this point, or
Sure. So Kevin, thank you. So one of the question here is what that is from Chris. What that explosion of MarTech does ideation from analysts drive the development of all those tools, or do the tools drive further innovation, driving needs for more tools?
so is the question, do the tools create the data, or does the data create the tools? Or I'm sorry, am I getting that?
Let me go again. With the explosion of MarTech,
Yep.
does ideation from analysts drive the development of for all these tools, or do the tools drive further innovation, driving need for more tools?
Yeah, you know what, I would that is sort of that's kind of a little bit of a chicken or egg question, but I do believe it's the latter. I believe that these, and this is why I believe it, because as I think of the analysts and innovation, I think innovation comes from good analysts, not from tools. Right? Tools are there simply to help a good analyst make sense of data, and the good analyst understands which tools can do that for them, and they use tools in a manner that helps them answer questions and solve challenges. And so I think the innovation that the analyst brings leads to the development of more tools as they find more opportunities to employ those tools. We'll talk about that, actually. That's a really good segue into one of the things we'll talk about here in the last section, and just the rule of the analyst vis-a-vis tools. But I firmly believe that that tool is nothing more than an enabler for an analyst. And as we have developed more and more challenges that we can tackle as analysts, those needs for those tools become greater and greater. It's that innovation from the analyst that is driving the creation of tools.
Great. The other question which we have from Val is, do you see the US adapting GDPR type compliance across the country, maybe next 5 years?
Yeah, I don't, beyond just the US, I mean, we are tracking regulation in literally nearly every country on earth, like is moving through their legislatures or the way that they operate. And I would expect that every country has some sort of user consent, consumer ownership of data. And it really comes down to, there are three things that those regulations really provide. It's for the consumer, the ability to say, yes, you can collect data on me, understanding who is doing that, right? The ability to understand why that data is being used, and then the ability to, and to make a decision if they want that use or not. And then the decision to either take that data themselves or delete that data altogether. So those are the regulations are all kind of moving around those three categories of importance for the consumer. And I would see it not only in the US, but really every country on earth in the next 5 years.
Yep, they have to develop that framework. The other next question I have from Chris Williams. He's asking about, with cookies being deterministic and modeling being probabilistic, and with cookies being removed, it seems like the focus would be more about modeling.
Yeah.
What type of modeling are we referring to?
Yeah, there is. So there are some, and you can see this, like Google's actually put out a number of blog posts around this, and we actually just had a big announcement yesterday. And there's this idea of what we call federated learning, which is using machine learning and a number of different systems to bring great computing capability to smaller sets of data, and model them in certainly a probabilistic way, but in hopefully a more accurate way. We have this approach that we call flocks, federated learning of cohorts, where it's basically those ideas that the idea of the different categories of interests that I showed you, that Google maintains, and literally every company that is operating an ad approach maintains as well. So Facebook has an idea of that for you. Your Apple device does as well, for sure. I don't know how you get to them as easily as you get to the Google ones, but they are there. That is the idea that we can still build those cohorts. I can still build a group of people who like baseball because I know what they're doing on my platforms. I being at Google, have all the access I need to my data. I don't know what happens when you go to Facebook. I might not now without cookies know what happens when you're out on the web. But when you come and start watching videos or conducting searches or have your location history on, I can get a good understanding of who you are, and I can create a more hopefully relevant picture of your interests so that I can match that to relevant ads. And that, I guess, to Chris's question, is how you're building models off less data for sure, because I'm not getting that full view, but I have enough to make some decisions. The other thing I want to make sure that we understand is that a place like Facebook, Google, Twitter, the only way they make money, right, is when people come and use their service. So that is what's most important to them. And the information that they collect is designed to give those people a better experience. No one wants you to see ads that aren't relevant for you. And so they are collecting that data to create that good experience so that you do come back. Now, maybe some of you are saying, well, the best experience would be no ads at all. But as we said, that's not going to happen for a while. This gets us to the problem that you see on the screen again, is that companies just are fumbling around with this, trying to communicate that to consumers and make them feel that it is in their interest to provide that data.
Correct. Yeah, relevance is important. Whatever they have to rally back, it's so we are just I think so. Coming to the section C, and the last Q&A would be Chris would be helping us on that. So I
Great.
think so. We are doing great on time.
Great.
Let's jump back in
All right.
last part of
And
the
this,
section, and then Chris will lead you through the last Q&A. Thank you.
perfect. Thank you, Hassan. Okay, so the path forward. I mean, the path forward is very exciting for analysts. Yeah. At its root, the role of the analyst, whether that is a marketing analyst, as we've been talking about a good deal today, or a financial analyst, or anyone dealing with data, there are 5 things that we do when we apply our analyst approaches. We either construct descriptive analyses of data, inferential analyses, exploratory as we go out and look for patterns, build models to develop causal, or apply statistics to look for causality, or we build models to do predictive analyses. These are the things that we're doing. And what is happening in our environment as we talked about, as tools begin to grow and evolve, analysts are building more and more capability in these areas to develop great insight, even if the amount of information and data that we're dealing with is reducing, right? Some of them are done through the application of technology for sure, and some of them are very exciting. We do some analyses at Google, and certainly any company that is collecting consumer information can do things similar. You all are familiar with watching videos on Google and having an ad pop up and then being able to skip that ad. When you skip that ad, you are sending a signal to Google and to the advertiser. You are telling them that you don't like that product or that you're not interested in watching that ad. You'd rather do something else for sure, right? And that behavior, skipping an ad, feeds an analysis that we use called retention curves. We know as people are viewing an ad for 30 seconds, at what point they are skipping. And we can build segments of consumers based on either the type of ad that they were shown or what time of day they were shown or where they were, or even based on what we know about them, perhaps these cohorts that I talked to you about. But it gives us a very clear idea of when engagement stops for those populations. And that becomes important because every advertiser who's building an ad on YouTube wants that to be engaging. They want you to watch that all the way through. They want you to be enthralled by that advertisement, right? That hasn't changed. But when you start to identify a conversion, a result like the people watching instead of skipping, you can start to optimize toward what was shown in that video. If I know when you skipped, I know what was shown at that moment that might have compelled you to disengage. And we can use machine learning and other really deep technologies to identify every single aspect of an advertisement placed in front of you and then correlate that back to your engagement level with the retention curve that I talked about, or some other metric that we want to optimize to. Those sorts of activities and analyses are giving us great insight into consumers. And frankly, it's fun. Like, these are the sorts of wild kind of analyses that we as analysts love to do, these sort of futuristic things. This is why the idea of bringing more technology into kind of the question that we had in the previous section is so relevant, right? Because analysts are finding more and more challenges that they want to solve, and they're finding more and more uses for technologies to help them solve those challenges. One of them is definitely neural networks and machine learning. Right? This is TensorFlow, which is an open source neural network tool that Google has produced. And you can go out there now and on TensorFlow and upload some data and use it to help analyze that data set and find some patterns. And that's the beauty of machine learning, is that with the vast amount of information and data that we have today, you need tools with that sort of strength to make sense of that information. And the machine learning algorithms and other tools that we're building are providing that today. We see the application of neural networks and other machine learning in our lives today, for sure. Several times a day, certainly. Anytime you get travel directions, you are from Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever you're using, that is a neural network that has determined through all the experience and all the information that it has collected what the most expedient way to get from A to B really is for you, as well as various options. And all of that is machine learning and neural networks. Chatbot functions. Doubtless, if you have had an online chat with a company lately, more times than not, you are probably just talking back to a machine that has learned how to behave as a human would on the other side of that exchange and react to the things that you're saying. Image search is a very practical application of neural networks, as it categorizes different images based on various keywords. Language translator, image identification, even today, drug design. We can use neural networks to help us in the healthcare and the prescription fields to understand how different compounds will react to one another and what effect they will have virtually, rather than having to conduct human-based trials. It doesn't completely obviate the need for human-based trials, for sure, but it allows us to make much more progress in a virtual sense, which will reduce the amount of time that drug manufacturing goes from concept to actually being out in market helping people, for sure. Much of this growth of technology and the impact on analysts has also been fed by the technology itself. Google is one of those places that have been leading in the idea, the concept of federated learning, this concept of having artificial intelligence that builds artificial intelligence, builds algorithms and trains those models. And so it's sort of a model on top of it, a model. Machine learning on top of machine learning. And much of this, while it does remove human guidance from the actual determination and work, it doesn't in any way eliminate the need for humans. These machines are not fallible, or infallible, rather, I should say. They make mistakes. They are good at identifying past trends and assuming that those things will continue to happen in the future. And they do get things wrong. One of the more famous examples, and this is the stuff of nightmares, but this was some of the work early on in image search. And so if you asked, in this case, the model to identify images of dumbbells, what the machine learning algorithm identified were dumbbells with these disembodied arms, because every time they saw a dumbbell, it had an arm attached to it. Now, the machine was not smart enough to know that the arm was not part of the dumbbell, right? And so these are the mistakes that are done early on. This is an example of just image search, but if you think of any new application of a neural network and any sort of machine learning tool, it's going to make those same mistakes. This is, again, at the beginning when we talked about the importance of those functional roles of the analyst, why that business strategy role is so important, so that you can make sense of the outputs from these highly technical advanced models, right? And why, again, when I'm asked which of those roles we should invest most of our time in, it's because of that. Now, as an organization, we can do our part to create an environment where analysts can thrive. And to do that, it requires a few things. It requires the right sort of what you might term maturity, organizational maturity, or view of the role of the analyst. And for this, I think this is best demonstrated in a rule that my friend Avinash Kaushik put together and called the 1090 rule. In Avinash's 1090 rule, what he said is any company investing in analytics should put 10% of their investment into tools and a full 90% into the resources, humans, the intelligent resources to operate those tools. I dare say that most companies have that reversed. They probably do their multi-million-dollar Omniture installation and implementation and feel like they are done, right? And that could not be any further from the truth. This is another reason why, as we talked about the roles of the analysts and which ones are most important, it's not necessarily that technology, that techie role. There are so many tools out there that are available for free that analysts can use and learn and get really good at. Things like R and Python have tremendous capability, right? And what an organization must understand is that purchasing tools and investing in technology is not the solve to their challenges. It's bringing along strong analyst talent that can utilize those tools to make better decisions. That is what an organization must do. That's the first step, is understanding that relationship of the analyst to the tool and investing appropriately. But beyond that, there is an attitude that we see successful organizations embracing. And that attitude happens at every level of the organization. Now, this is typically a talk, or I'll show you some slides that we would demonstrate and show to the C-suite of an organization, right? Those at the very top that are making the big decisions. And we say there's a role for you to play, there's a role for your non-analyst leaders to play, and there's a huge role for your analysts to play. And this is how you, at the top of that organization, and create that environment. Now, if you are here with us today and as an analyst, this is still an important message for you. This is the sort of change that you should be advocating for inside of your organization, right? And the kind of attitude that you should be pressing your leaders to embrace. Those attitudes, first for the analysts and the environment that is created, is that any organization should strive to be a place that an analyst wants to join, right? And you do that by sort of an ethos or a code in your organization. One is that you reward curiosity, not mastery. You don't want people who are great, and you don't want to be in an organization that expects you to be great in one position. You want people who are athletes, people who can move with the changes of the environment and can use all the tools available to them to make better decisions using data. And as we've seen, that is a fast-paced, evolving environment. And so curiosity, the ability to ask questions and go out and pursue those questions, is what's most important. We also see successful organizations for their analysts encouraging a test, fail, learn mentality. It is not an environment where failure is seen as a negative. What failing in some attempt means is that the analyst has tried to reach beyond their bounds and stretch, which any organization should want. but also it's a tremendous learning opportunity. What did go wrong? How do we learn and improve in the future? Those are tremendous insights that any organization can gather, but it takes committing to this, to being a safe place for the analysts and for allowing failure. Finally, there should be an expectation of robust processes. Any analyst should understand what good work looks like and how to spot bad work as well and avoid that bad work. That is what the analyst should be accountable for. And when you build an environment like this at the analyst level, then we see the foundation for a successful environment. But it doesn't stop there. It also requires that leaders in the organization, those outside of the analyst community who are stakeholders for that organization, understand the role that the analyst plays, and they understand data as well. Certainly not to the expertise that the analyst does, but they understand and appreciate how that data can be used. You hear quite a bit of organizations saying that they are data-driven, that they do data-driven decision-making, but I think very few really understand what that is. And certainly very few organizations outside of their analyst communities understand the limitations of data, understand the uses and the opportunities. And those are the sorts of environments that among those non-analyst leaders, successful organizations have. They do this by democratizing data. In that way, they know when there are self-serve methods and access points to data that relieve the analyst of doing menial tasks. There are dashboards created internally that a non-analyst leader can go to and get answers to some of the simple questions that they really shouldn't be burdening the analyst with. It means that those non-analyst leaders present analysts with challenges, not orders, and not requests, right? They don't come to the analyst saying, I need A, B, and C. They come to the analyst and say, here's the business challenge I'm trying to solve. How do I do this? This requires a respect for the expertise of the analyst and an understanding of what the bounds of their swim lane, if you will, are. Finally, it requires a push for those non-analyst leaders to set quantifiable goals and embrace that as part of their accountability. To understand that their performance, their objectives can be measured and should be measured, and to commit there. And then finally, at the top of the organization, what we talk about seeing in the successful org is a data savvy executive. We are far past the time when any executive could rely on others for data understanding. Any executive operating today needs to be able to ask the right questions and know what they can actually expect. Really understand not only that they should be able to ask questions about how they can mitigate risk, those can be tested. That is just the day that those executives also understand what their data is solving for. A clear example, at least in the marketing world, is the use of a media mix model. Now, many executives, the media mix model is an enormous model that takes in data from everywhere that they can collect and then isolates the effects that drove consumer behavior. And what that model hopes to show is that when you invested in television, you got this sort of result. And when you invested in digital or online advertising, you got this sort of result. Now, that model is limited by default. It's inconceivable that you could model for every single effect, from weather to friends' influence to to the exchanges that you have with the consumer, particularly now with cookie deletion and many of those interactions lost. The executive needs to understand that. They also need to understand that a media mix model works only on the data that it can collect. So if you invested in television, then it could model that. If you didn't put any money into Facebook, a media mix model won't be able to tell you the opportunity loss there. And so understanding that that media mix model is a generalized guide towards media performance rather than a blueprint for how you divide spending across those channels is critically important for any successful analyst and or executive, and particularly any organization that an analyst will be prized and successful in. And then finally, we've talked a lot about the rise of technology and the growth and where we are today as a community. And a big part of that community are partners who are working with companies and where analysts are to help extend their capabilities, make them better, give them more information so that they can make better decisions. Those organizations have matured. We saw from Brinker's map just the growth there, and we are at a point now where executives should expect to hold their partners accountable and be demanding with them, because those, as I said, those systems have matured, the investments that they're earning have matured. While they do need to have understanding and they do need to know what questions they can ask, they should expect answers from those partners. The combination of those things at the executive level, the non-analyst leader, and particularly with the analyst's role inside an organization, when they have their ideas right and that level of maturity and are making the proper investments, will lead to an environment where the analyst can be successful, particularly in this brave new world where we are more reliant on technology than ever before, and the combination of our business sense and our smarts with our ability to collect data and then tell stories from them. That's where, as the analysts, this is such an exciting time, because we have never been more valued than we are today. We've never been more in the middle of things, a more important component to decisions made by companies. And at the same time, we are all experiencing very new environments and very new technology that is helping us do our job. This is exactly why I think that role that we are in today is precarious, but tremendously exciting. And there's no place that I would rather be. And I hope for all of you sitting out there that you're exactly where you want to be as well. Thank you. That's with that, I will wrap, and we can go to, I think, the final bit of questions that we might have today. And is it then Chris that I'm looking for?
Yeah, hey Kevin.
Hey Chris.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. I'll give it a second in the chat to see if anyone wants to ask any questions, and then we can take it from there. Actually, if you don't mind, I have one while we're waiting.
Yeah, please.
Earlier you talked about that explosion of MarTech tools, and I just wonder if you envision a point with neural networks, NLP, ML, whatever, where you have some sort of black box type of products out there that business practitioners can sort of just think about a business problem, go, oh, I'm going to go see if I can get a model built for that, and go to some sort of product or machine, like some little off-the-shelf product, to like dump those things in? Or is that not feasible?
Oh no, I believe we're there today. Well, so here's the problem, Chris, is I believe in practice we are there today. And this is part of the problem and why it's so important for us to be analysts and advocates here, because you can write today to literally hundreds of companies that could tell you they could solve any business problem that you'd have under the sun with their technology. it is all proprietary, and it is all held behind. And this is where data that they clearly don't have consumer consent, and it doesn't seem to bother them. There are other somewhat nefarious activity. We call it digital fingerprinting, which is using your digital fingerprint online, right? Which is really the peripherals that you have plugged into your device, and even your battery level and how quickly that drains, and other things that you don't have any control over, to identify you as a unique person, right? And companies will use that to kind of build a what we would call an identity graph on you. And there's absolutely no way that you as a consumer have consented to the use of that data, and still it happens. And so there are literally hundreds of black boxes out there today. The challenge is, can you trust those solutions? And can you trust them? And will that the owner of that solution be upfront and honest enough to admit how they things like their data provenance and the way that they use that data came to be?
Got it. Great, thank you. Okay, we've got some from the group here. Could you briefly share your view of the current status of government policy on data privacy and transparency?
Yes, I think it is well-intentioned, is the headline. I think that, again, it's all, from what I've seen, the data regulation is centered around the idea that consumers should know and have control over what data is collected of them, who's collecting it, and how that data is being used, and have access to that data, make it portable, make it accessible. That seems to be, in the regulation that I've seen, the guiding principles, and that is correct, and that is the right approach for us as consumers. The challenge comes in how you actually get that down to the ground and into real practical application. And I've seen some legislation, for instance, that talks about how, regardless of whether or not I as a consumer allow you as a platform to use my data or not, I have to create, the platform needs to create the same sort of experience for me as it does for someone who shares their data. And that just can't happen. You know, the things that we've learned, that data, as I understand who you are, allows me to build a more customized experience. If I don't know who you are, I can't do that. And so the regulation, again, I think it's all very well intentioned. It's the application of it, or how you turn it into something practical, that is more challenged.
Cool. Another one, and I know we have a few more minutes, so hopefully we can sneak a couple more in. Is the cookie issue the beginning of the end of programmatic advertising?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think you will see a shift. And I don't know exactly what that will look like. I think the idea of programmatic advertising is the use of algorithms to drive the placement of ads. And so when your website loads and the ad pops up, what that ad has done, that ad is the result of a digital exchange that is operating in the background, that took inputs from a number of advertisers, all who bid on placing an ad to you. There was some adjudication in that exchange. One ad won, the other one's lost. That ad was placed. That model is tremendously efficient. I mean, those ads load in the time that it takes a website to load, so it's happening in milliseconds for sure. But that is such an effective and efficient process that it will continue to operate. The data that those bids that advertisers are tendering on showing you an ad has to do with what they understand about you, and typically that has to do with the cookie that you are bringing with you to the ad experience. Without that, I think what will happen, there will be some way that companies work around that. Either, this is where you'll see more forced logins. This is where the browser will want you to log in more frequently. When you are logged into a browser, there isn't much of a need for a cookie because I know who you are, right? And I can start to collect a profile information about you if you've consented to that, right? So it's a great question. I don't believe it's the beginning of the end of programmatic advertising. I think it's just going to be a very important inflection point where we kind of took this old 26-year-old infrastructure and replaced it with something that is much more built for the future.
Thank you. I know there's a few more questions. Madhuri, I know we're running a little short on time. Do you want to wrap? Do you want to try to sneak a couple more in?
I think we can take a couple more.
Okay, great. Kevin, how do you feel about AI being one of the newest marketing buzzwords for new products?
I don't feel bad about artificial intelligence, and I know that there's some connotations there of sort of the idea of the robots taking over, and I've never looked at artificial intelligence in that way. I think the sort of applications that we talked about today are all very positive and important, critically important, particularly with where we are today, to arm the analysts with more, with the ability to make sense of either the vast amounts of data that they're able to collect on a single platform, or the shrinking amount of data that they're able to collect with the experience outside of that platform, right? We need things like neural networks, we need machine learning, we need artificial intelligence to do that. There are other buzzwords that I have trouble with. One of them that I've never liked the idea of big data. It's never made any sense to me, right? Like that was, as a practitioner and someone who has seen data grow and understand that we're getting more and more data, slapping a marketing title of big data on it so that it could make sense, I think, to others outside of the analyst community never made a lot of sense to me. The idea of a data scientist is another that I've never really gotten my head around either. Those are the sort of buzzwords that get under my skin, but artificial intelligence does not.
Got it. If you were going to give some advice to executives who traditionally use analysts to pull reports,
yeah,
as opposed to being problem solver,
yeah,
what advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's very simple. It is, aside from like the 1090 investment, it depends on who that investment that executive is, right? I mean, you should get things like that right. But the simple advice is to understand your expertise and then have respect for the analyst's expertise. And what those executives can do to make themselves and their companies more effective is present analysts with business challenges. Any executive, particularly those who are the executive that is coming to an analyst and saying, I need this report, this report, this report, is looking for answers to questions that they think they have. Rather than treating that analyst as an order taker, show up with the problem you're trying to solve. You are expertly and almost uniquely positioned to identify that challenge. Do that and allow the analysts to develop the solve for that challenge. That is the way you'll be more effective. That is the way that you allow that analyst to use their expertise to provide the solutions that you want. And rather than making simple incremental changes and decisions that you can make off the reports that you are asking for, you can make substantial leaps and gains. That's the advice that I would give to those executives.
Great. I think that's a great place to potentially leave it. Madhuri, would you like to wrap?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Chris, for the Q&A, moderation, and Ehsan as well. Thank you, Kevin. This session, the talk that you gave was super thorough, yet so very well put. I really, really liked it. Hope folks also found it intriguing. There were so many interesting data points and the infographics that you shared, the tree map. It was wow. Some of the highlight points I would want to call out as a summation is qualities of an analyst, the three. The tree map I already mentioned, evolution of digital marketing landscape. 90 to 95% revenue from digital marketing is another one. Like, you would imagine that there are other revenue sources for such big companies, but it's something to know. The concept of ZMOT, very well put and explained. Thank you for that. In the new normal, talking about transparency and control of data capture restrictions, impact of those restrictions, especially the reasoning behind the increased ads that we all have been seeing everywhere, uh, size of the market there, and the path forward, especially talking about investment in analytics, where and how much you should do from your friend, but then explaining further with the tools and technologies and what should be the clear definition of the roles and expectations of each of them and the skill set of each of them. I think you just summed it all. I would say thank you so much for your time and sharing these thoughts with facts with us.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much for having me.
With this, I would like to thank everyone who joined today to attend the webinar. The screen, I think you can see that Inform Chicago chapter serves the Midwest area, and with virtual, we can, we hope to expand more. Please connect with us, join Informs, and connect with us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Meetup groups. Feel free to reach out to any of the organizing team. You can find more information about us uh, in the slides, as well as when you search the Inform Chicago chapter, you can see the contact us page with all of our profiles and how to reach us. Thank you so much for attending. It was great having you all here and attend. We will be sharing the link to this recording to all the registered folks. And if you have any questions in future also regarding this, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Thanks again.